Soon after lifting the tarp off the Discovery, a cloud of dust entered my lungs, forcing me into a coughing spasm. It was worth the burn now emanating throughout my chest and my throat. After all this time, I had finally found it. "You had me do all this digging for this, a stupid mirror," the man complained with an old croak. I hadn't realized he was still behind me, wanting to witness the fruits of his labor. I had badgered him well to find what he thought was just an antique mirror. "I paid you, didn't I?" I replied. He shrugged and trotted back into the expanse of the warehouse. As I watched his reflection retreat back through the narrow aisles, snaking through boxes and mountains of old furniture, I could see that the mirror was already doing its job. In his reflection, the top of the man's head had appeared as though it were completely crushed inwards and deep red bloodstains were pouring down his back. "If you really want the thing, then it's yours," he said, disappearing into the maze. I wasn't a tall woman, but the mirror towered over me a good foot, and the frame felt ice cold as I propped it up on the dolly and wheeled it to the front. Loading it up took some finessing. I'm not sure how it ended up here in this backwoods antique warehouse, but I wasn't about to raise a fuss about finally locating it after all this time. An elderly woman holding a book that looked somehow older than she was sat plopped behind the cash register as I approached the exit. Her frizzled and snow-white hair made her look like she had just been struck by lightning. "I don't remember bringing this in," she claimed. "I'll give you $45 for it," I started, interrupting her thought process. "80. My husband really had to dig for this thing," she fired back. I was no negotiator, and I was certain she had years of bartering experience behind her from working at a place like this. "Deal," I said, reaching out my hand for hers. It was right after I let go of her hand that we heard a tremendous crash from somewhere in the warehouse. Sounds of old wood splintering and glass shattering reverberated through the atmosphere. The tumult shook me like an earthquake. The woman stood up with a deep concern that shone through her weathered and wrinkled eyes. "Tom? Tom?" she called out, running towards the commotion. I pulled out my wallet, fished out a $100 bill, and placed it on the counter. I didn't mind overpaying her. She'd need the extra cash for the funeral. It's 3 a.m. again. I don't need to look at the clock because I've woken up at the same time every night for the past 3 weeks. It's not my fault. It's that thing in the dark that wakes me up. I wake up to the sounds of terrible noises. It will say horrible things. Things I wouldn't even say to my worst enemy. Things one can only imagine in one's nightmares. It will make the sounds of metal being torn asunder, bombs exploding, or the horrific screams of dying children. It mimics their little voices crying out for their mothers. Sometimes it gets ear-shatteringly loud. My neighbors never complain, so I assume they don't hear it. It doesn't stop until the sun comes up, but by then I have to go to the factory. It's slowly eroding me like waves on a sandcastle. Last night things got to a boiling point. I couldn't take it anymore. "Leave me the fuck alone," I screamed out into the darkness. My eyes searched the void and were returned with an ominous stare by 2 yellow orbs with black reptilian slits down the middle. For the split second that our gazes met, I was filled with hate and sadness. Painful memories from the campaign resurfaced, and I threw my face back into my pillow and sobbed. The voice laughed at me with a raspy smoker's cough and then mimicked the sound of a crying baby until the sun came up. It's now day 59 and I'm still sleepless. At most, I catch a few minutes of shut-eye, but other than that, I didn't think it was ever possible for a human to go without sleep for this long. I haven't talked to anyone about it. They can't help me anyway. The few buddies I served with in Afghanistan won't call me back. I'm fighting this creature alone, and I know I can't hold it back forever. I only know one thing. If it keeps going like this, if it doesn't leave me alone, I will lose eventually. "I never told you about the things your uncle and I used to find out here, did I?" Billy asked his boy as they plodded along the forest path, the frozen, snow-covered earth crunching beneath their feet. Andrew shook his shaggy blonde head. "People leave all sorts of junk out here. Porno mags, old clothes, stuff like that. What's funny is that we always found stuff, lots of stuff, but we never found the people that left it behind. Ain't that funny? Billy continued. Andrew knew that once his father started, there was no stopping him, especially not after he began pulling from that pocket flask, with the "Don't Tread on Me" sticker emblazoned on the front. Andrew had smelled that burnt, smoky scent so often that he could recognize it from a mile away. Billy took another deep draw from the small, silver flask. Andrew watched him take a few swigs and heard the noisy gulps of the liquid trickling down into his gullet. Billy was used to the way his throat burned every time he drank, but he still wheezed like a broken vacuum. He couldn't help it. This whiskey was the good stuff, and the pain was worth the pleasure. Soon the liquor's heat would push the winter chill from his body, and the aches in his back would go away too. He gasped again, wiped a dirty sleeve across his lips, and slipped the flask back into his vest pocket. Then he slung the rifle over his shoulder again and turned towards Andrew. "That's funny, ain't it?" Billy asked again, his tone more insistent. Andrew nodded. "No matter how far you come out here, you always run into someone else's shit. But you never see the person or their tracks, even during this time of the year. The tribe that used to live in these parts, they had a local legend about a monster that used to live out this way." Billy cleared his throat and wiped a few stray beads of spittle and whiskey from his lips again. "Now what was the name of it? The Wampum? The Waiute? You remember, boy?" Billy glanced at his son. Andrew answered him with a shrug. "Anyways, they have this local legend around here that there's a spirit of something that lives out in the middle of the woods. It takes the form of someone you know. Then it leads you deeper into the forest, where it takes you. God knows, but anyone who follows it is never seen again. Hell, maybe it's real and it took all those folks that come out here after all. Maybe that's why they left everything behind. I don't know. I ain't never seen anything strange or heard anything either. My pal Randy, the park ranger, you remember him? He said he has seen some shit out here too." Billy stopped in his tracks to think. Damn, this'll kill me. What was it called? The Winnebago? Andrew knew his father would keep guessing until his buzz wore off. Billy grunted and shook his head, and the pair continued on through the forest, Andrew silently plodding through the snow and Billy plowing through like a bull in a china shop. In the fading sunlight, the forest around them began to take on a dark blue pallor, and the shadows of the trees grew deeper and stretched their gnarled branches across the path. Again, Billy slipped the flask from his pocket and took another swig. He could still feel the crisp December air sneaking its way into his camouflage Carhartt jacket, and he needed to warm up fast. But then a wave of guilt crept into him as he realized how much colder his son must be. "You cold, boy? You want a swig?" On second thought, you're only 12. "I'm 14, Dad," Andrew replied. Billy quickly dropped his head, hoping Andrew hadn't noticed the look of shame spreading across his face. The whiskey-soaked gears in his mind churned quickly, desperate to find something else to change the subject to. What the hell did this tribe call that thing? It was their own version of one of those skinwalker creatures, except the thing I found most curious about it is that it never makes you do anything. You just follow it on your own. It talks to you into following it deeper into the forest. I always wondered how it could do that. "It's getting late, Dad," Andrew broke Billy's train of thought. "We gotta bag a deer at some point, Andrew. We ain't going home empty-handed," Billy grunted, but Andrew could hear was beginning to slur his words. "By the time we get to dressing it, it'll be pitch dark," Andrew protested. But there was a shift in Billy this time, and Andrew could see the frustration bubbling out of him like an overboiled pot of water. "All right, now listen. Your bitch mother asked me to take you out today so she could finally catch a break from your ass. So don't be complaining when I'm doing her a favor, you hear?" Billy's breath reeked of alcohol as he stepped closer and nearly jabbed his finger into his son's chest. But Andrew held his ground, cleared his throat, and muttered in a low voice, "We're never gonna bag a deer if you keep bitching like that, Billy." Billy had started towards the path again, but his son's words yanked him back and he spun to face Andrew. "What did you just say to me, you little shit?" "I'm saying," Andrew started, but Billy swiftly cut him off. "You're saying nothing. You don't ever talk to me that way, and we ain't leaving till we bag a deer." Billy pulled out his flask again and raised it up high, draining whatever swill was still left at the bottom. "Mom left you because you weren't man enough. Andrew muttered under his breath. But as quiet as the words were, the sentence hit Billy like a slap to his face. What was that? That's what Mom said. She told me you weren't man enough to ask for a raise, that you always stank of booze, that I needed a stronger man to raise me, and that's why she took me and left. Billy was taken aback. He could only stand there, stunned. He felt as if he'd been struck by a bolt of lightning, but it had been his own flesh and blood. Listen, Billy started, but then he began to whimper. He didn't want his son to see him cry like this, but those words had stung his heart like a hornet, and the alcohol had weakened the floodgates in his eyes. He whimpered again like an old wounded dog, and Andrew took a step towards his father. His firm, cold hand reached towards Billy's large, callous one. It's okay, Dad. We can still go bag a deer if you really want. But Billy didn't hear him. He hadn't expected to be punched hard in the gut like that. He understood his ex-wife's frustration with him, but she needed to leave Andrew out of it. Billy's mind began to swim, grasping for words like branches in a raging river. It's fine, boy, Billy finally said through tears. We can go back now, watch some football, whatever you want. I just want to do you proud. I know, Dad, but let's keep on. Us Coburns don't quit, right? I know where we can find some deer, through the woods, right this way. Andrew smiled, clutching his father's hand with a firm grip. Billy took one last look at the path they had followed through the forest and noticed that their snow prints had changed ever so slightly with each step. His own prints melted and flattened as the last of the sunlight blanketed the forest floor in that last gasp of light before nightfall. But at first, Andrew's prints seemed to be disappearing more with each step, until the last few prints barely showed at all. It didn't make sense, but Billy pushed the thought from his mind. It was probably just a trick of the fading light. I remember the name of it now, Dad, Andrew continued and looked up at his father with his shining blue eyes that seemed somehow to pierce through the encroaching darkness. It was the Wachug. The Indian tribe called it the Wachug.